Now, tonight I'd like to talk to you about one of the most important cornerstones of financial planning that often gets overlooked. You know, when clients consider starting investments, the things they usually focus on are things like, what kind of investment I'm going to make, whether it's a stock or a mutual fund and so on. Then they figure out how they're going to deposit their money, whether it's going to be a lump sum or whether they're going to do monthly or weekly deposits. Then they're looking for rates of return, as Drummond was talking about, and we prefer more than zero for sure. And then any tax breaks that these investments might provide you with. Then the next step is looking at their investment goals, like paying off your home, maybe saving money for your children's retirement, and also for your children's education, and your retirement. Now, in many cases, investors do forget to consider the effects that unforeseen events can have on their investment goals. Things like premature death, injury, and illness are not only devastating emotionally, but they can also have devastating financial consequences for you as well. Now, while younger families usually don't think about these things, older people aren't really comfortable talking about illness and death. But regardless of your age, these things can happen and you can't ignore them. So what happens to your family if you die prior to reaching your financial goals? Well, first of all, it doesn't matter how much you intended to save. If you pass away, you're not going to meet those goals and your family can suffer financially as a result. And what happens if you can't work anymore? Do you have group benefits at work? And if you do, how well are you covered by those benefits? Do they include disability insurance? And if you do have disability insurance, is it enough coverage? Or do you need to get some supplementary coverage to cover the shortfall? And what if you're diagnosed with a critical illness? I think most people do understand the need for life insurance, and more people are starting to understand the importance of disability insurance. But is that really enough to protect your financial future? So let's just kind of review that. First of all, you're putting the money away for your future. You bought life insurance to protect your family in case of your early demise. And you believe you're adequately covered by group benefits at work, including disability. And you think you've done everything right. Excuse me. But now you or a loved one is diagnosed with cancer. And what are you going to do? Disability insurance is only going to cover the person that's actually sick. It's not going to provide benefits for a loved one who's staying home to care for you. And often, even if you have disability insurance, there's long delays in receiving your first payment, and in most cases, at least 90 days. And that leads us into what I'd really like to talk to you about tonight, and that's the critical illness insurance part of your portfolio. Now, doctor, what is critical illness and where did it come from? Well, Dr. Marius Barnard was the heart surgeon who was part of the team that performed the very first human heart transplant in South Africa way back in 1967. And he's credited for inventing critical illness insurance. And I mean, isn't that surprising? It wasn't an insurance company that came up with the concept, but rather a doctor who saw the financial difficulty of his patients who actually survived the surgeries. As a heart surgeon, he helped many patients make full recoveries from their illnesses, but at the same time, he saw them suffer financially for the years to follow. Dr. Barnard was once quoted as saying, "I used to operate on people and boast about my great results, about patients surviving 5 and 6 years. But all of a sudden, I saw the social and financial implications, and I knew nothing about insurance, but I knew that life insurance would pay out on the diagnosis of death. But to me, my patients lived for years, but in this time, they died financially." Now, Dr. Barnard passed away back on November 14, 2014. But his legacy leaves behind critical illness insurance has helped many people avoid financial disaster that he frequently witnessed during his practice. So in memory of Dr. Barnard, let's just take a look back at the history of critical illness insurance. Now, in the early 1900s, people had a life expectancy only of about 50 years of age. And the survival rate from diseases such as influenza and pneumonia were very low. So therefore, life insurance was basically the only insurance that most people needed, since death was nearly a certainty to be paid whenever anyone got one of these illnesses. But throughout the 20th century, medical discoveries such as antibiotics and vaccines led to an increase in life expectancy. Once what was fatal was now curable. And things such as heart disease and cancer and stroke became the leading causes of death, but even though these were still also very treatable. And as medicine advanced, most people were able to survive these illnesses, although not always in the best of health. Now, Dr. Barnard recognized that his patients, although able to survive a heart disease, were unable to work at full capacity after surgery. And the lingering effects of their illnesses, surgeries, medication, and recovery, had an enormous impact on their ability to earn money. And although they had survived, they were overcome with extreme financial hardship. And while the families of these patients would have been supported financially had they died, they didn't have any financial support should they live. and there appeared to be an increasing need for a type of insurance that would pay a benefit to an owner if he or she suffered from a heart attack, in addition to the need for life insurance. To broaden the usage of this new type of insurance, coined critical illness insurance, he included coverage for the 4 most common illnesses, being cancer, heart attack, stroke, and bypass surgery. Now, in 1983, along with the help of a South African insurance company called Crusader, excuse me, Dr. Barnard introduced critical illness insurance to the market. And as a medical consultant at Crusader Life, Dr. Barnard helped detail the definitions of critical illnesses, which still stand today. And as long as an owner developed one of these 4 critical illnesses and met the definition, a lump sum would be paid to that individual. So basically, it removed any financial strain that the insured suffered, while keeping the focus on the road to recovery. People now had the option of passing that financial risk associated with a critical illness to an insurance company, and many people did just that, as witnessed by the rising popularity of the product. Other insurance companies launched their own critical illness insurance products, and soon more illnesses were added to the covered illnesses. Now, in 1991, Dr. Barnard also added children to critical illness insurance. And today, many of the claims are for children, sadly, and the majority of them are suffering from leukemia. Now, critical illness insurance has evolved to cover more than 25 different conditions now. And critical illness insurance also can provide coverage for loss of independent existence. And that is the total inability to perform any 2 of the 6 activities of daily living that we consider, like bathing, dressing, toileting, bladder and bowel continence, transferring, and feeding, or cognitive impairment. Now, also, excuse me, in addition to all the conditions that critical illness insurance covers, in Great West Life's situation in particular, all their CI policies and their group benefit policies include what they call best doctors. And it's a great benefit, and I'm going to share that example with you in just a few minutes. Now, critical illness insurance comes in many forms in Canada, and it includes term 10, term to 75, term to 100, and paid up policies. So I guess what I'm saying is that there's a policy for everybody, regardless of your need or your benefits and your what you can afford. Now, the sale of critical illness insurance continues to grow as more people recognize the importance of protecting their finances should they survive a critical illness. And the way it works is this: 30 days after you've been diagnosed and you survive that illness, the insurance company will pay a tax-free lump sum to the insured to cover expenses. And it can be used for anything, things from out-of-country medical expenses or other things that aren't covered by OHIP, maybe to help pay bills such as your mortgage, maybe allow a spouse or a parent to stay home to take care of a loved one. It can also be used to maybe remodel a home because you have some disabilities that require some help. Maybe taking advantage of something on a bucket list. So basically what I'm saying is the money can be used for whatever you want. These are just some suggestions and examples of what people have used the money for in the past. Now, in addition to the coverages that critical illness insurance provides, if you're one of the lucky ones that never makes a claim, this insurance policy can, at maturity, refund to you 100% of your premiums that you paid. So I mean, imagine that. If you're sick, it'll pay you, and if you don't get sick, you get all your money back. You really can't find better value and at the same time protect you and your family. To me, it's incredible. So, if the product is so great, why are so many people not insured with critical illness insurance? And I think part of it is that the product isn't really promoted that much. And also, people don't always understand how the critical illness insurance works. Older people, I think a lot of them think that they have the financial resources to deal with anything that might happen. And also, it gets very expensive when we get much older because it's heavily underwritten based on family history and your health. Younger people, even though the cost is low, they don't think anything's going to happen to them. They've got better things to spend their money on. And they believe that OHIP is going to take care of anything that might come along, just like they believe CPP is going to fund their retirement. And we all know how much that's going to help you. People assume that these listed diseases, although common, they're not going to be affecting them anytime soon. So they've got more important financial priorities, and they'll consider buying CI when they get older and more likely to need it. But unfortunately, myself, I've learned through personal experience how important this product is to people of all ages, from infants to seniors. And I'd like to share with you a couple of personal experiences that we've had to deal with. Now, the first one is as a client of ours, the long-term client of ours, and when their son was 3 years old, he was diagnosed with leukemia and another rare form of cancer. And the treatments were so intense that his mother had to quit her job as an accountant to stay home to care for the child. She converted her office to basically a little mini hospital because the equipment and medication that this child needed was incredible. And on top of that, the pressure was so bad because the only place they could get the right treatment was out in London. They couldn't deal with the travel anymore, so father quit his job, they sold their house, they left their family and friends behind, and they moved to London. Now you can, never mind the financial burden, imagine the emotional burden these people had to deal with, besides having a young child and having to make all those changes. Then there's an acquaintance that we have at the cottage, somebody that we know that has a cottage not too far from us. And he's about my age, and he was diagnosed with had a heart attack, a severe heart attack, and he wasn't able to work anymore. And he had a really good income, and he had disability insurance that worked through his benefit plan, and he figured he was adequately covered, but he never really looked at the plan. The problem was that he did have a long-term disability, but it was capped, and there were limits. Now, it was a tough hit for him and his family because he was only able to get 66% of his income to a maximum of $3,000, and that coverage ceased at age 65. Couldn't have it beyond that. Now, you might initially think that $3,000 a month isn't bad, but when you consider that this guy was making over $200,000 a year, $16,000 plus a month, and dropping to $3,000, you can imagine the financial impact it had on these people. And the sad reality is we see these people every spring when we go back to open the cottage, and we annually see how much it hurts these people financially. So much so that now they're coming in their retirement years and they're having to sell their cottage because they can't afford to keep it anymore. And that's really not what it's supposed to be about. Then there's my son Michael. When Mike was 31, he was diagnosed with fibromatosis. And the diagnosis was a really big emotional roller coaster for us because initially they thought it was full-blown sarcoma, and they said he had 6 months to live. Then they told us, no, we think he's going to be okay, but we're going to have to amputate his leg. And then it was, no, we're not going to have to amputate his leg. We think we can do some major surgery, reconstructive surgery, and he'll be okay. And if you can imagine as parents, this going up and down like this, how much effect it had on us. Now, Michael was uninsured for critical illness insurance. He didn't see the need for it at that time. He didn't have a mortgage, he was single, didn't have any kids, and he didn't have a lot of financial responsibilities. But it was a huge mistake because now Michael is married, and he has children, and he has a mortgage like everybody else. The problem is, because of his health history now, he's uninsurable and can't protect his family through insurance. Now, getting back to the best doctors benefit. This is an incredible benefit that Great West Life offers to their plans. And what it was, we were very fortunate because although Mike didn't have critical illness insurance, we had group benefits at work. And so because of that, we were able to take advantage of it. And what it is, for anybody that's had someone that's very close to them that's ill, your biggest fear is making a mistake or not getting the right treatment or making a poor decision. You don't want to be the one that's the reason why somebody passes away or struggles. So you'd like to get a second opinion, but a lot of times you don't have time for that, right? It's urgent. So what Best Doctors is that second opinion. And what it is I collected all the medical information from Michael, and I sent it to Best Doctors organization. They then in turn sent it to the #1 orthopedic surgery hospital in the world, Duke University Medical Center. And Dr. Brian Brigman, who is the chief of surgery there, actually analyzed Michael's stuff for free, wrote a synopsis of it, sent us his whole book on it, and he agreed with everything that Princess Margaret had said, except for one item. They made a suggestion with a specialty MRI situation. I can't remember, it was a little complex. And we showed it to the doctors over at Princess Margaret, and they said, great idea, we're going to do that. So this thing did two things for us. First of all, it made me feel good about knowing that we made the right calls for Mike, that there was nothing else we could possibly do. If it didn't work out, we did everything we possibly could. But the second thing was, it really increased our confidence because what we found out was that the doctor that was going to be performing the surgery on Mike at Princess Margaret was actually one of the listed doctors worldwide as one of the best doctors. So now we knew, hey, we got a great doctor looking after our son as well. So that was important to us. Now, Michael's prognosis and his treatments went kind of like this. There was 5 weeks of radiation, and it was every day. It was every morning we had to get up at 5 a.m. and drive to Toronto so that we could be there in time for his treatments. And it was every day for 6 weeks, if you can imagine. Then there was 6 weeks of recovery from the radiation treatments to have the surgery, and then 3 months of recovery from the surgery, and then 3 months of rehab after the surgery had healed. So really, when you look at it, he was almost a year with having reduced or no income. And to add insult to injury, Michael's a Red Seal chef by trade. And he was working for a prominent restaurant in Mississauga. And when he went to his boss and told him that, look, I'm going to need time off because I've done the radiation and all this. Now it's time for me to have my operation. I'm going to need about 6 months off. The boss told him, well, basically, sorry about your luck. I can't hold your position. And I was blown away. I was so angry. I thought, my God, the kid's going through all this stuff and now you want to take his job from him too? So anyway, I went to our lawyers and asked them if they could get away with that. And yes, they can. In Ontario, they have every right to replace you if you can't fulfill the job. And they have to run their business, and that's the way it is, cold or otherwise. So needless to say, we don't eat at that restaurant anymore. But anyway, Michael's original hospital experience was a real eye-opener for me. Because when we showed up at that hospital that day, and you remember, Mike, we were expecting he was going to be the one lone young guy that's sitting there with a bunch of old people. And when you're really sick like that and you have a serious condition, the hospital, what they do is I call it a class, but it's mostly more like a meeting where all the patients sit down in this meeting with a loved one, and they kind of go over what kind of treatment you're going to be dealing with and what the effects of it are going to be and what you can expect. And to me, I was shocked because I saw, first of all, so many young people in this room. There was 14 of them in Mike's class, and 5 of them were younger than Michael. One of them looked like he was over 60, and the rest of them were all between 30 and 45 years of age. It just was a shock to me. So the other thing was that you would think that when someone gets sick, that their focus is going to be, I'm going to beat this, I'm going to do everything I can, I'm going to feel better, we're going to win. But most of the people, when they opened it up to questions, they weren't talking about getting better. They were worried about, how am I going to get here? How am I going to pay for this? Is there any financial subsidies we can have? And I was just so surprised that people were more concerned about the financial burden that it was creating rather than the physical, the real physical complications that they were going to be facing in the very near future. Now, OHIP is a great program. And, you don't have to look far. Just look over in the US and see how lucky we are to have such a great program. But as good as it is, it doesn't cover everything. And when Mike had the radiation, the first thing was it cost us $700 in parking for that period of time, just for the radiation alone. And then we had to go at 5 a.m. every morning to get there early, so we had breakfast every day for 6 weeks, every single day. These costs, it's not huge money, but it starts adding up into the thousands of dollars. His lost wages, even before getting married, he still had obligations like a car payment and a phone, a cell phone, and so on. Now, fortunately, our family had the flexibility and financial resources to be there for Michael and to help him through this difficult time. But make no mistake, it was still difficult for us, and it did take a financial burden on all of us. So back in 2014, Michael had a relapse, and at that time, they suggested chemotherapy weekly for 2 years. Again, time off for treatments, and also time off for sick days after those treatments. And he had reduced income for his family. And he's doing fine now, he's doing great, but he's unable to continue a career with prolonged standing on his feet. So he was fortunate, we're fortunate that Mike has decided to come and work at Langwell Financial and help us with the customer service, and we're really thrilled to have him there. He's a great part of the team. Now, Mike's relapse in 2014 took a huge financial toll on his family, especially since at the same time that Mike was going through the chemotherapy, that they had to deal with their newborn son who had serious medical issues. Our grandson Logan was diagnosed with biliary atresia, which is a life-threatening condition that he was born with. And he didn't have critical illness insurance because it happened right at birth. He had to have major surgery, a 9.5-hour operation at the age of 5 weeks, just to save his life. And he's going to have lifelong complications, and eventually he's going to need a liver transplant. And he has frequent hospital stays at sick kids, and they're usually for about 10 to 14 days every time he goes there. And when you've got a little child like that, somebody has to be there all the time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So we take turns. We're lucky, we have flexibility in our family that allows us to take turns so that Logan is never alone, and to relieve each other so everybody can get their work done. But sadly, so many families are unable to do this. And we've seen many small children depending on hospital volunteers to help them through their painful, stressful situations as sick kids, and left alone in between, and watching them cry themselves asleep at night. It's heartbreaking. And the volunteers are great, but they're strangers. And unfortunately, it's not that the families don't want to be there. They can't afford to be. They have to work. They can only go there on weekends. And it's just, like I tell you, it's just a terrible experience to watch what happens out there, and there's nothing you can do. Now, I've already told you about some of the expenses, like, gas and then parking and so on. But there's also food. When you're there, 24 hours a day, you've got 3 meals a day now that you have to pay for, which can really mount after, for 2, 3, think about it, eating out 3 times a day for 2 weeks. The cost of just that alone. Then you got to stay somewhere. You end up having to pay for hotels as well. And then last year, at the end of February, Charmaine and I, at the end of RSP season, we usually go to Florida. The very next day after we got there, we just flew to Florida, and the next day Michael calls us and says, Logan's liver's starting to act up again. We need your help. So Charmaine had to jump on a flight the very next day and get back home and spend a week at the hospital with Logan while everybody was able to continue to work. And I don't have to tell you how much it costs to get a last-minute airline ticket. Now, if you don't have any critical illness insurance at this point and something happens, well, how are you going to deal with some of these expenses? Well, I guess if you own RSPs, you could cash them, but the tax implications are huge. And if you use up that money now, you're not going to have anything at 65 when you retire. You could take a loan, but I mean, who's going to lend you money if you're not working? And even if you could secure that loan, how are you going to pay for it if you're not working? And there's the cost of the loan itself. So clearly, these aren't very good options to looking after your financial well-being. So it really makes me wonder how many people actually have the flexibility and resources to handle the types of situations I've just shared with you. And I hope you never have to experience some of the setbacks that our family has. But if you ever do, what you really need to ask yourself is, are you really, really protected? Either through insurance or an emergency fund. Could you really do it? Could you or your spouse stay home to recover or to take care of a loved one? And are your children covered? And if not, are you in a position to help them? What about your grandkids? There's a picture here. This is a t-shirt that the kids bought for me several years ago in Hawaii. And you can see, it's funny. It really is. And I'm telling you, when I wear it, everywhere I go, people actually stop me. They want to take a picture of it. They say, I can relate. That's so true. That's so true. And as funny as it is, the reality is that that if your kids or your grandchildren don't have the resources or coverage to take care of themselves, that responsibility is definitely going to fall on your doorstep. You know it. And I know there's many parents and grandparents here tonight. And I mean, really, is there anybody here, parent or grandparent, that hasn't at some point had to offer some financial help to 1, 2, or all of your kids? Every one of us can identify with that fact, that our kids always come to us if they're in problem and they need us. And the price of critical illness insurance for a young person is insignificant, especially when compared to the cost of dealing with an illness if they're not covered. And even if you as a parent or a grandparent had to pay that premium for them because they couldn't afford it, that's a heck of a lot cheaper and a lot better way to go rather than dipping into your life savings. So don't make the same mistake that other people make, thinking that it's not going to happen to them. It can happen to anyone. And it can happen to you or someone that you love, and it could easily destroy your family financially and emotionally. And that's why I'm making it a priority to encourage all of you, and I hope that you will encourage all the people that you care about and love. And talk to your family and tell them to include critical illness insurance in their financial plans. Now, as always, we always record our presentations, and this will be on the website soon. So please tell your friends and your family to look at it and listen to what we're trying to tell them. We also have included good support materials in your little folders tonight, and I'd appreciate it if you take a look at it and call us if you have any questions. We'd be happy to help you.